When one thinks of Anglo-Saxon England, some of the first images that come to mind are the exquisite treasures of Sutton Hoo and the Staffordshire Hoard, especially the gold jewellery richly adorned with deep red garnets. Such objects represent an extraordinary but surprisingly brief episode in the story of early medieval England. They are remarkable not only for their magnificent craftsmanship, but also for their exotic raw materials, the product of global connections in an era sometimes described as the Dark Ages. Today, on Deep Down History, we explore Anglo-Saxon England's Golden Age. In particular, given that England lacks significant deposits of both gold and garnets, we ask, where did these materials come from in this period? To begin our story, we need to travel back in time to the end of Roman Britain during the late 4th and early 5th centuries AD. To judge from the hoards of precious objects from this period, mostly buried in eastern and southern England, Roman Britain was rich in gold and silver. One hoard from Thetford in Norfolk contained high-quality gold jewellery, including 27 finger rings set with precious stones. Another late Roman hoard, found less than 20 miles to the east at Hoxton in Suffolk, included no fewer than 19 gold bracelets, as well as an extraordinary quantity of coins, 569 gold solidi, and more than 14,000 silver coins. Whilst a sophisticated Roman gold mining operation did exist at Dolycothe in Wales, the late Roman gold and silver coins in such hoards were minted outside Britain. This supply of imported coinage was suddenly curtailed when Britain left the Roman Empire in the early 5th century. The contrast between late Roman Britain and the earliest period of Anglo-Saxon England is stark. The early English settlements and their burial grounds have produced very little in the way of precious metals. In addition to the loss of continental supplies, it seems the mines at Dolycothe no longer operated in the early medieval period, and, in any event, the site lay well outside the ambit of the early English kingdoms. And it appears relatively little of the old Roman wealth fell into the hands of the new settlers and invaders. A curious entry in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, allocated to the year AD 418, tells us that the Romans collected all the gold hoards which were in Britain, and hid some in the earth, so that no one might find them afterwards, and took some with them to Gaul. Though the copies of the Chronicle that survive today were compiled more than 400 years later, this entry perhaps preserves an old tradition that explained the relative lack of gold to be found in early England, save for the occasional find of Roman treasure. One notable exception to this picture in 5th century England is the hoard found at Patching in Sussex, just a few miles from the southern coast. This collection was deposited sometime after AD 461 and included 23 gold and 27 silver coins from both imperial and Visigothic sources, as well as 2 gold rings of high purity. Whilst we cannot know the owner or precise context for the burial of this hoard, it is possibly relevant that a king of Sussex, Arla, was recorded as the first Anglo-Saxon leader to gain dominance over the other English territories south of the Humber. In addition to the occasional import of continental coins, there is another type of golden object sometimes found in eastern England and in Kent in the late 5th and first half of the 6th centuries. These are the gold bracteates, thin discs with looped mounts and die-stamped decoration. They originated in Scandinavia, but also came to be made in England. Like some of the coins of this period, they were used as pendants or parts of necklaces rather than as a practical form of exchange. The delicate thinness of the bracteates only serves to stress the general paucity of gold and other precious materials available in early England. At this point in our story, it is worth taking a brief detour to Merovingian France, because in contrast to the gold-poor early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the contemporary evidence from the near continent paints a very different picture. We first catch a glimpse of this in the treasures buried with the early Frankish king Childeric at Tournai around the year AD 481. His tomb was discovered in 1653, and though most of the finds were stolen in 1831, the remaining objects, along with engravings of those now lost, reveal the riches available to the Frankish elite of this time. Of particular note are the surviving ornamental elements of Childeric's sword and the scabbard of his scramasax, decorated with garnets placed into golden cells, a technique known as cloisonné. Childeric's treasure was probably the earliest example of this practice in Western Europe. Also present were numerous examples of small golden bees, again inlaid with garnets, perhaps once attached to a cloak. Most of the garnets found in late 5th and 6th century Merovingian jewellery were ultimately sourced from India and Sri Lanka. In the case of Childeric's treasure, those from Sri Lanka dominated, with a handful from India. Unusually for this early period, some of the smaller garnets were also sourced from Bohemia in the modern Czech Republic. The extraordinary riches of Merovingian Gaul in the 6th century are similarly made clear by the main documentary source for this period, the History of the Franks by Gregory of Tours. Gregory tells us that in the year 507, Childeric's successor, King Clovis, was appointed as a Roman consul. He celebrated this honour with a procession through the streets of the city of Tours to the cathedral there, a journey of around half a mile, whilst throwing gold and silver coins into the gathered crowds. The following year, Clovis sent his men to betray and murder Clodoric, one of his rival Frankish leaders. We are told that Clodoric, who had murdered his own father, was taken by surprise and killed whilst demonstrating his father's treasures by plunging his arm deep into a treasure chest of gold coins. Whilst the Merovingian kings may have inherited more ancient Roman gold than their Anglo-Saxon counterparts, the source of much of their wealth in the 6th century was subsidies for military assistance from southern Europe, in particular the Byzantine emperors. Massive payments of this nature in gold are recorded on several occasions, especially in the second half of the 6th century. Much of this gold coinage was melted down to make treasures in the form of jewellery and plate. It is perhaps no exaggeration that Gregory tells us that the dowry provided for the daughter of the Frankish king Chilperic in AD 584 consisted of 50 wagon loads of gold, silver and other precious objects. Eventually, in the later 6th century, some of this extraordinary wealth found its way to England, probably by the way of elite gift-giving and trade. But it was not evenly distributed. The Anglo-Saxon kingdom that seems to have benefited the most was the one with the closest links to the Franks, the kingdom of Kent. Finds from cemeteries in Kent, especially in the eastern half of the kingdom, have produced examples of some exquisite objects that made use of imported gold and garnets. Amongst those accompanying female burials were gold pendants set with domed garnets. Even more impressive were the composite disc brooches, using the cloisonné method to set garnets and coloured glass within golden cells, forming intricate patterns. Celebrated examples have been found in Kingston, Sarr and Monkton. Where such objects were made is a matter for debate, but evidence for gold jewellery making has been found in Canterbury, whilst the nearby settlement of Faversham, named after its smiths, may also have produced high-quality metalwork. Though gold was always relatively rare in Anglo-Saxon graves, the evidence from Kent suggests that access to precious metals was more widespread within society than elsewhere. In the other early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, objects incorporating gold remained the preserve of the elite, and may often have relied on contacts with Kent. Examples include the golden belt buckle from the late 6th or early 7th century high-status burial at Brittlewell in neighbouring Essex. Similarly, the gold and garnet belt buckle from the burial mound at Taplow in southern Buckinghamshire was one of several objects with stylistic parallels in Kent. Despite the early importance of Kent, perhaps the two best-known examples of gold and garnet Anglo-Saxon jewellery were found elsewhere in England. Most famous of all are the objects from the ship burial at Sutton Hoo in Suffolk, found beneath Mound 1 in a barrow cemetery that may have been reserved for the royal dynasty of East Anglia. Though we cannot be sure, This burial is often suggested to be that of King Radweld, who died around the year AD 624 or 625. In addition to the famous helmet, shield and sceptre, other finds accompanying this burial included some of the most accomplished examples of gold and garnet decoration work found in Anglo-Saxon England. First, there is the great golden belt buckle with its so-called Style II zoomorphic figures picked out with niello. Examples of cloisonné work include other smaller buckles for belts or straps, two unusual shoulder clasps, a sword harness mount shaped like a buckle, and the lid from a purse. That purse had once contained 37 gold coins, as well as 3 blank coin flans and 2 gold ingots. The 37 coins were all tremises, a smaller coin worth about a third of the solidus, but of high purity, with around 86% gold on average. They came from Merovingian Gaul, seemingly all from different mints, perhaps, though this is disputed, indicating careful selection of the contents. The picture at Sutton Hoo has more recently been supplemented by finds of many gold and silver items from the site of the nearby royal settlement of Rendlesham, suggesting that the East Anglian kingdom had its own independent connections to the continent. Perhaps the most famous recent find of gold and garnet items from Anglo-Saxon England comes from a site near Lichfield in the Kingdom of Mercia, namely the Staffordshire Hoard. Much of the contents consisted of decorative fittings or mounts from elite war gear, and in the main, the objects are thought to date from the late 6th century and the first half of the 7th century. In other words, broadly contemporary with the Sutton Hoo burial. Though some material seems to have come from Northumbria or Mercia itself, it is thought that many of the objects with cloisonné work probably came from East Anglia, possibly even from the same workshop as some of the Sutton Hoo pieces. The garnets in this style of work were often intricately shaped, flat-cut pieces, laid onto a backing of thin gold foil impressed with a detailed geometric pattern. The technique gave the garnets a distinct glow, an effect that has been compared to that of a modern bicycle reflector. Scientific analysis of the garnets from the Staffordshire Hoard has shown that their provenance was varied. Most came from sources in India and the Czech Republic, with a smaller number coming from Sri Lanka. In some cases, garnets from all 3 areas were combined in the making of a single object. This mixture of Asian and European sources is also seen in at least one object from Sutton Hoo. It is worth noting that the cloisonné objects from Staffordshire and Sutton Hoo were made at a time when the supply of garnets to Western Europe was changing. From the late 6th century, it seems the trading patterns that carried Asian garnets were disrupted, causing increasing reliance on sources from Czechia, Portugal, and perhaps Sweden. And yet it seems the use of Asian garnets persisted in England later than in continental Europe, suggesting either alternative supply routes or better use of old stocks. Nevertheless, from the mid-7th century onwards, even in England, the supply of high-quality garnets suitable for cloisonné work declined, with more reliance on smaller stones and the use of cruder methods to cut and chip them into desired shapes. We've seen then that the objects of the first half of the 7th century from Sutton Hoo and the Staffordshire Hoard represented the zenith of Anglo-Saxon England's golden age, both in terms of the skilled use of garnets and the high purity of the gold employed. It was during this period too, from around the 620s onwards, that the English began to mint their own gold coins, producing tremises, also known as thrumses, in a number of places, including London and Kent, as well as other possible mints in East Anglia, Wessex and the York area. And yet, just as this gold coinage emerged, the seeds of its demise were already sown. The flow of imperial Byzantine coinage to the Frankish kingdom had already started to decline by the second quarter of the 7th century, and the effects of this would soon be felt in England too, with gold coins increasingly debased with silver. The hoard of almost 100 coins found at Crondall in Hampshire, which was probably deposited before AD 650, illustrates this process. Most of the coins were minted in England, but their gold purity typically ranged from 40 to 70%, contrasting with the earlier imported coins at Sutton Hoo. After the mid-7th century, the purity of English gold coins declined even further. By around AD 675, the minting of gold coins had ceased altogether, and from then on, the issuing of English coins would be dominated by silver. The declining gold supply to 7th century England also became visible in its jewellery. A visual comparison of two composite disc brooches from Kent illustrates this change. The deeper gold of a brooch from Saar probably indicates an earlier 7th century date, whilst the paler gold of the brooch from nearby Monkton suggests it was made in the mid-7th century. A well-known group of brooches of similar date, found at Milton and West Hannay in the Upper Thames Valley, likewise bears witness to this new scenario. Although their design seems inspired by similar brooches from Kent, the metal cells that separate their garnets were made not in gold, but in copper. In retrospect, we can see that by the later 7th century, the literal golden age of Anglo-Saxon England was already over. It had lasted barely 2 or 3 generations, representing perhaps around 10% of the eventual span of Anglo-Saxon history. Though gold became scarcer, it did not disappear from the archaeological record altogether. Documentary evidence also suggests that objects used in the newly built churches of mid-Anglo-Saxon England were sometimes still dazzling, with references to golden vessels and crosses, as well as richly adorned altars and statues. Moreover, finds of other objects in silver and copper from this time suggest that, if anything, there was a quickening of the economy. In a later period, the famous Alfred jewel of the late 9th century shows that gold of a high purity remained available for those with the means to procure it. Nevertheless, the high-quality gold and garnet cloisonné work of early 7th century England represents a remarkable moment in time, never to be repeated. The raw materials for this jewellery relied upon networks of trade and exchange that linked England to the near continent and in turn to the Byzantine Empire. In the case of garnets, the chain of connections went even further, to India and Sri Lanka. Ultimately, these extended supply routes proved vulnerable to political upheavals in faraway lands. For a brief period, however, the opportunity existed, for the elites at least, to acquire objects of such astounding beauty and skill that they still captivate people more than 1400 years later. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel to be notified when new videos from Deep Down History are released. Until next time, cheerio.